Hello and welcome back to my channel where I talk about Japan, the JET program, give my advice, share my experiences and showcase my travel. So if any of that interests you, then be sure to subscribe. I love my kids. I love my students so much. But on the JET program, you may find yourself in situations where there is a class that you are, how should I say this? Less enthusiastic to teach. A class where overall the majority of students are very well behaved, if not a bit quiet, but there's just a select few, a small group of the class that is a bit of an issue, becomes a problem.
You have to try to make an effort.
No, I don't.
Ignores you.
Lauren, French is an important language.
Not for me, eh?
Talks through your lessons.
Oh, it looks like we have some clowns who are desperate for airtime.
Makes it impossible to teach the rest of the class. Hello, editing Jakub here, working away. I just wanted to cut in and clarify something I don't feel like I got across in my initial recording, and that is that although the tips I'm going to give in this video are based on my own experience of dealing with problem classes over the years, it is by no means referring to any specific one class or any specific students. Some kids are better behaved than others, that's just facts. And another thing to be aware of is just that I'm not in charge of discipline. That is not the ALT's responsibility. Just be aware as well that some ways to discipline kids that might be normal in your country might not be acceptable here. So for example, when I was in high school in Scotland, it was very common for teachers to send misbehaving children just outside the classroom. Can't do that here. This video is really just tips and advice for ALTs for situations like that, and it is not a rant or venting about my own situation specifically, so don't get it twisted. Back to the video. So before we get into it, I just want to give a quick shout out to Brian and Emma, my first patrons. So welcome and thank you guys very much. If any of you are interested in being shouted out in one of my videos, then check out the link to my Patreon in the description of this video. There's loads of fun stuff there. There's behind the scenes videos. You can access my lesson plans and exclusive JET application and interview advice. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, check it out, link in the description. So yeah, I have 5 tips for you guys on how to best tackle these kinds of situations and minimize the stress, the distraction, kind of everything a little bit, just kind of lowered. So tip number 1, my first tip is no group work. No group work. 0 group work. Especially if all these kids that are the problem kids are sitting near each other and gonna end up in the same group. Because it's a struggle enough to keep their attention when they're just sitting in pairs. But when they're actively meant to like be facing inward to each other, that's just gonna intensify everything. So just adapt all those kinds of activities into pair work, because they're probably sitting in pairs anyway. It's just so much easier and less time consuming when it comes to getting their attention again and again throughout the lesson. Okay, so the next tip is to simplify all of your explanations. If you're explaining how an activity works, if you're explaining a grammar point, maybe you don't need to give every single detail, just give them the bare minimum so they can start on some activity, and even if you know they don't have everything they need, at least they can start. And then the kids who are really engaged, who want to learn, when they come across some kind of knowledge gap, they will ask you for help or the JTE for help, and you can start to go to kids individually. Otherwise, you're just going to spend so long explaining things because you're constantly telling these kids to pay attention and listen and be quiet. There's just not going to be much time to then do the activity. And it's not to say that I'm just going to let those problem kids not learn everything and just fail. When push comes to shove, when it gets to the point where they're like, okay, we need to do this to get a grade for this class so we don't fail, then they will come to you, or they'll come to the JTE or whatever in their own time. And I think you really need to just let them come to you on their own terms, otherwise they're not going to care. That's the only time they're going to actually listen to anything you have to say.
I can't understand what you're saying, sir.
Yeah, just simplify your explanations and then help out the individual students who want to know. My next tip is to have a private conversation with your JTE. In my experience, problem classes often have a certain kind of JTE because different JTEs operate differently. Some of them are very strict with their class, or they just have a very good rapport with their class and the students show a lot of respect to that teacher. Other JTEs are happy to let the kids run wild, but that's just that JTE's vibe. They think, oh, it's fun, you know, this is just what these kind of lessons are like. And other JTEs are going to completely check out, zone out. After the lesson, the JTE will sometimes be like, oh, this bunch is so like, they're so Genki, or they're so enthusiastic, ha ha ha. And I'm just like,
Before, I was going to keep it to myself, but actually, I think I'm a little bothered now.
And it's not the JTE's fault, because that's kind of just how they operate. But what I would say is just have a private conversation with them. I'm not saying blame the JTE, because it's not their fault. I'm not saying get angry at the kids. Just say something like, I'm really struggling to teach this class. I don't think it's fair to some of the kids who are trying to pay more attention when I'm getting distracted by those specific kids.
Okay, and what do you want me to do about that?
If it's possible, could you please maybe step in when they're being a bit too loud and ask them to, you know, stop? Just something as simple as that. Something so the JTE takes you seriously. I think they will take that on board, and at the very least in class they'll be looking out more for those situations when the kids are really peaking their distraction levels. Next is just to generally shorten the time that you have for activities. So for example, if for one activity, if I put a question on the board or a few questions and I say, okay, talk with your partner, and then I'm going to take some answers from some of you. I might give most classes, say, 5 minutes, depending on the activity. But with this class, I'm going to give them 3 minutes, or maybe even 2 minutes, because that extra time is spent in the explanation, because it's taking so long to explain because of how loud they are. And it's unfortunate, but it's a problem class, and that comes with certain limitations that you just need to accept. And finally, I mentioned earlier that some JTEs command a lot more respect from their classes. Often the case with these problem classes is the kids that cause the problem, they don't show you any respect because they don't see you as another teacher.
I am perfectly qualified to teach English.
I don't think you are, though.
You don't have to be English to teach it.
Right. Have we got double English or double Scottish?
And I know that as an ALT we are technically assistant language teachers, but at least in the way that I run my classes, I really do run those classes. I am the teacher in those classes, and to them, I should be on the same level as the JTE. My tip is to not skip any formalities in these classes. For example, in most classes, I'm happy for the kids to just call me Jakub. I don't need them to say Jakub Sensei or Mr. Jakub or anything like that. I don't at the start of the lesson get them to stand up and bow and everything as they do in most lessons. I'm happy to have a much more relaxed atmosphere because they're already so nervous around me and I just want everything to be chill and friendly and nice. But with problem classes, that's kind of the opposite of what you need, so make sure they're doing all the same stuff they would in any other class because they need to see that you are just like the JTEs, so they owe you the same amount of respect. And that's all my tips, but I also want to finish just by saying, remember that the majority of the class are not an issue, because it's easy to get wrapped up and focus on those problem kids, because you should not be dedicating the majority of the lesson to trying to get their attention. And a lot of the kids are really good at English, but because the problem kids have such a loud and dominating personality, they'll just stay quiet and keep to themselves, and so it's difficult for me to gauge how the other kids are doing. So it's better to just get them working as quickly as possible and focus on the kids, help them out, give them the opportunities which they deserve, and so on. Don't forget them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, and if you want to see more content about my life in Japan and on Jet, then do subscribe. And if you're interested, then be sure to check out my Patreon page, link in the description. I'll see you guys next week.